So you look at the RFP, there's 3 periods to it, 3 stages, what you do before, during, and after, right? And so the pre-bid, you're determining what to bid, and you're cleaning your data. You're trying to, you're removing the pandemic from 2020 and 2021 for your forecast to 23. You're determining who to invite, whether it's incumbents or new entrants. And that's what you do in the pre-bid. During the bid, you get the rates back, and you can either give very detailed information to carriers. I've seen exceptionally detailed things, voluminous documents, or very vague. Whatever you give, you'll probably get back in turn. But carriers will submit rates and capacities, and I think it's down to about 1 to 3 rounds of bidding. In the 90s, there were some like a dozen rounds, 15 rounds. That's gone. But that was when people were first experimenting. And then post-bid is where you're doing the optimization that I just talked about. You're determining which carriers, which lanes, and getting that assignment done. And the challenge is, just because you have faster optimization and better software, because it is great now, there's some great packages out there, it has not sped up the process. It's just like the vacuum cleaner did not reduce the amount of time people take to clean. Their level of cleanliness went higher. So for here, if I have a tool that can spit out 1,000 scenarios in a day, I'm going to spend that day with 1,000 scenarios. So the optimization has not reduced the time, it's increased the ability to dive in. So you have executives make dozens to hundreds of scenarios. And then again, that lane assignment is fed into the TMS and the routing guide. What are the problems? Well, the first thing, the effort to do this is still enormous. It's gotten better. Data is out there, but data is still ugly. Volume forecasts that you're making 15 months out, because if you want to run a bid, say in February, I'm collecting the data now and making my forecasts. I'm going to give it out to the carriers, and it has to be for the next 12 months. So I'm making my forecasts of my demand over a year out, which is kind of insane, to be honest. And then volumes can be gamed. This is what we were talking about earlier. It's easy to say, okay, every lane I had volume on, just throw it in the bid. We'll get a rate. I'll keep that in my back pocket. I have a contract that makes me feel better because it's like Linus's blanket, right? So I have coverage there. So that's where the problems with a big bid is, that you have some challenges there. When you talk about the bid itself, few carriers can handle a lot of the data that comes in, and so many of these come in. The process is only the bigger carriers can really handle this effectively or efficiently. And also, carriers will also overbid. They will throw a bigger net. This just makes sense. They throw a big net because you're not going to catch every fish, right? And so they tend to win less than a quarter of the bids that they submit. And of what they win, only about half actually materializes. That's the frustrating thing. So even if they win, they don't really get it. So there's a lot of overbidding going on.
You're basically saying, putting on my CPA hat, that the carriers, even though they, in overbidding, the expectation there is that they'll basically get 12.5% of the business that they're bidding on. If you take
you
one
just did
quarter,
some math right there, didn't you?
Yeah, well, that's it. But
very
I think
impressive, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. But I think this is something that people need to understand, because when we had the crunch of 2021, Chris, people were like, where are my carriers? They have a contract with me. But these carriers also, maybe you could just briefly address, and I don't mean to hold you up here, but these carriers are also trying to figure out, how am I going to allocate equipment based on the fact that I might only get 12.5% of what I bid, or in a really tight environment, now the expectation is they expect me to be there for 40 to 50% or whatever. And that's the compounding issue that I think a lot of people were surprised by in 2021, 2018, when the market was exceptionally tight.
Yeah, it goes both ways. Both shippers and carriers want consistency, right? And so but doing some of these contracts, it's a false sense of security sometimes. But let me just finish this up with the post-bid problems. And like what I said, all the sophistication goes into that, setting up the plan, and people will use a scalpel to, this carrier gets 3.8 loads per week on this lane and 6.7 here, and everything's very intricate. You feed this into a wood chipper, essentially, that is the routing guide. And it pretty much says this lane, this origin, this destination, this carrier, this price, and it gets totally dissected that way. Also, the time from when bid was submitted to implementation can stretch to be 6 months sometimes. And so there's been a lot, especially over the last 18 months, a lot of reneging of rates by carriers, even as they're submitted, as they're released. So this happens a lot. So these are the problems.